Greetings and welcome everyone to session 5 of the Emerald Choral Academy. I am Gary Cannon, Artistic Director of the Emerald Ensemble, a professional choir based in Seattle. The Emerald Choral Academy is a series of interactive webinars during which our area's leading professional choristers will reveal their personal tricks of the trade to community singers. These webinars will then be made available freely to singers across the world via YouTube. The Emerald Ensemble is very grateful to our generous donors who have made this project possible, particularly For Culture and the Seattle Office of Arts and Culture. We encourage anyone participating or viewing this webinar to make a donation as you're able at emeraldensemble.org. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our mailing list to hear about future sessions of the Academy and the other activities of the Emerald Ensemble. This webinar is being recorded. By participating, you are granting the Emerald Ensemble permission to share your contribution. Your microphones and cameras will remain off for the duration of the presentation. You can ask questions to the presenter by typing into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen or by using the Q&A feature. Periodically, I'll interject to field your questions, and there will be a designated Q&A period at the end of the presentation as well. You recently received a confirmation email that included 3 PDF handouts. You may wish to access them now, although I think they're going to be visible more or less as needed on the screen also. And we'll put a link to those handouts in the chat window when we get started. Our topic today is IPA 101, the International Phonetic Alphabet for Singers. And I invite Scott Kovacs, the Executive Director of the Emerald Ensemble, to introduce today's presenter.
Well, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us tonight. We're just so excited to welcome Michael Bennett as one of our faculty to the Emerald Choral Academy. Michael works all over the Seattle area as a professional singer, choral tenor. You've probably seen him in a bird ensemble concert with Radiant, Sound City Singers, Choral Arts Northwest, Pacific Music Works, Cantare, and St. James Cathedral Cantore, and the University of Washington Chamber Singers. Where I get to intersect with Michael is at St. Mark's Cathedral, both in the Compline Choir and in the Evensong Choir there. So I get to sing with Michael, or at least I was in the before times, just about every week. Prior to joining us here in Seattle, he performed in choral ensembles all over the East Coast, including New York and Philadelphia, Princeton, and Boston, and has additional study in Germany. He's a gifted conductor, pianist, and can teach music theory, music history, musical theater, and has a very interesting background in linguistics, which he'll share with you just a little bit more later on. He's also right now teaching long distance at Concord Academy in Concord, Massachusetts, and maybe he'll tell us a little bit about that. And he's finishing up his PhD in music history at the University of Washington. I am happy to introduce my friend Michael Bennett.
Thank you. And Scott, you make me sound very busy, which I suppose I am, although, you know, what that really means these days is sort of anyone's guess, right? But it's my pleasure to be here. I'm happy to share my knowledge in this area for those who are attending and those who will watch afterward. And I will say that, yes, my entry point into the world of the International Phonetic Alphabet, unlike those who generally go and learn this as a voice major, perhaps in an undergraduate program, my entry point into this field was as a linguistics minor during my undergraduate, where I was studying music theory and composition, but found my way into an introductory linguistics course as an elective, and completely fell in love with the idea of language as a kind of cultural phenomenon. And given my interest in singing and the emphasis on the voice, I gravitated toward courses that were in the areas of phonetics and phonology, which are the branches in linguistics that deal with speech sounds. And so part of that training requires learning the international international, being fluent in able to read and transcribe narrowly different speech sounds using this language. So I'm excited to share my knowledge with you this evening. It's an immensely useful skill for those of us who are singers who frequently find ourselves performing music in languages that are not our own mother tongue. And it's a really, if you know how to read IPA, it is a quick and easy way to get right to the correct pronunciation. And I think especially in a group setting where you want to have a unified pronunciation, especially among all the singers, this is a useful language to be able to use to kind of get everyone on the same page, so to speak, for the way that you pronounce the text in choral music. So the International Phonetic Alphabet, as was kind of previewed in the teaser for this workshop, was developed in the late 19th century. A group of British and French linguists came together and sought to create a unified system of written symbols that would stand in for the possible speech sounds and enable linguists to be able to transcribe the way that all languages are pronounced. And it's been revised and revised as we've discovered new languages and sought for increasing subtlety in how we represent the very fine points. And this gets into an idea of what's called narrow versus broad transcription. And I think for our purposes, especially as singers, a more broad transcription is helpful, really just the vowels and the consonants, and particularly in the languages that we find ourselves singing in the most, like Latin and Italian, French, German, and English, of course. I'd like to begin by showing you the full chart, and this is one of the handouts that you have. So you can feel free to look at that on your own, or I will share my screen now. And this is the current version of the International Phonetic Alphabet. And as you can see, there are many different symbols. Some of them look familiar to us as letters of the alphabet that we're used to seeing, the English alphabet, and others are either characters that we do not see in our language, or in some cases, characters that were invented really for the purpose of this language. I like to think of the consonant chart here at the top as kind of the periodic table of the elements for speech sounds. And we're going to be focusing the majority of the evening today on the vowels and the vowel chart, but I thought I would start by just showing you what this consonant chart looks like. And basically, the way that the consonant chart is arranged is to have what's called the place of articulation running across the top. That's where in the vocal tract the sound is produced. And then going up and down on the sort of the y-axis, the vertical axis of the table, is what we call the manner of articulation. So you have place of articulation and manner of articulation. And the manner refers to the way in which that particular part of the vocal tract is engaging with the tongue or whatever, whichever of the articulators are coming together to make that particular sound, and whether it is, for instance, a continuous sound versus one that is just sort of stops after you make it one time. So you'll see here, for instance, in the corner, the bilabial position. This means speech sounds that are made with both lips. Okay. Where you see consonants in pairs, it means that the sound is essentially the same. The place and manner of articulation are the same. However, the one on the right-hand side, as you'll see in the bottom, this sort of disclaimer here at the bottom, symbols to the right in a cell are voiced, to the left are voiceless. So you'll notice that a P and a B sound are really the same sound. The only difference is that the vocal, the vocal folds are coming together and actually engaging for the sound B versus a P, which doesn't require any vibration of the folds. A nasal, for example, is a sound where the air is directed through the nose as opposed to out the mouth. So M would be the example of a bilabial nasal. So this is really useful. You'll see the most common sort of sound is this fricative category. This is a kind of continuous sound that is made by creating some sort of closure and then passing air. So there's a fricative Z in every single place of articulation on the IPA chart. There are some other sort of things that are left off of that main chart, such as clicks, implosives, ejectives. These are sounds that we do not encounter very often in choral music, certainly in European languages, although they do exist throughout the world and are you know, common in other sort of non-European languages. We'll be speaking in depth about the vowel chart, but I think perhaps now, even at this early point, is a good time to ask if there's any questions about the vowel portion of the chart.
About the consonant portion.
Thank you. Yes, the consonant portion of the chart.
I don't see any questions yet. I was wondering if you can demonstrate for us the difference between some of the voiced and voiceless pairs. That may be a new concept to some.
Of course. Yeah, great. So let's look at the fricatives. A labiodental fricative, meaning that you are bringing your teeth and your lip together. So a voiceless labiodental fricative is F. I'm still bringing those two parts of my vocal tract anatomy together, but I'm not engaging my vocal folds. Whereas with a V, you can even feel on your larynx on the outside that there's vibration happening there. The same is true in this next pair right next to it. This sort of theta symbol is a TH with no vibration of the folds, such as the first sound in the word thin. There's no vibration, whereas a word like thy or thine would have this symbol that's to the right, that is a TH sound where the vocal folds are engaged. Similarly, S and Z is a great pair here that we're all familiar with. So the idea of hissing on an S, we have no engagement of the folds, whereas Z, we do. And I think for us as singers, it's important to realize that voiced fricatives can be pitched. In other words, you could sing on a Z, whereas you couldn't sing on an S. So those of us who like to do bumblebee type warm-ups and do lots of Z, you know, in our warm-ups, fricatives are great for, you know, creating some back pressure there. It's great for singing, but you can't sing on a voiceless fricative. So you do need to engage the folds.
You know, so, and the next one, the one right after that is the sh versus zh.
Yes.
Which is helpful, like treasure and such. And that one, so one of the things for IPA, I'm going to make myself visible. One of the fun things I love for IPA is actually writing, you know, in the scores, a reminder of which one is an S or a Z, things like that. Yes. But I always struggle, and maybe some other folks do too, at remembering which symbol is which for the TH.
Oh, okay.
Do you, and the kind of the long S and the kind of weird Z, I kind of get those.
Yep.
But the THs, do you have a mnemonic or some system of remembering which is which?
I always just think that this is a theta. That's the letter here, the Greek letter, and theta has a voiceless TH at the beginning of it.
So if you've studied Greek, you have a plus.
Yeah.
And the
I suppose it's a mathematical symbol, but now I'm really getting out of my depth here too. So.
That's fine. Good. Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions on this quite yet. So let's proceed ahead, I think.
Okay, great. So I'd like to move on to the full vowel chart here. And this is, it's incredible to look at this chart and realize just how many vowels there are. Those of us who speak English, we know that we have quite a few more vowels than, say, Spanish or Italian even. But certainly to look at the diversity on this chart is somewhat overwhelming. And so that, you know, there's that's a valid response to have when looking at this chart. But again, we have these kind of X and Y axes that are dividing the chart up. And so along the top, we have sort of the place of the vowel. So whether it's frontness versus backness. So vowel sounds that sit closer to the front of the mouth the mask versus the bat. In reality, this is actually related to the formant structure, the second formant. So those of you who are familiar with voice formants, the close versus open distinction here on the left-hand side, that sort of vertical axis, that refers to the frequency of the first formant. So vowels that are up here toward the top have a lower first formant versus vowels that are down here at the bottom. Similarly, with frontness and backness, you have, with the second formant for back vowels tends to be lower, and the second formant for front vowels tends to be higher. I know not everyone is super familiar with formants and that kind of acoustical voice science, but the basic principle is that there are sort of reinforced bands of frequencies in the overtone spectrum above sounds, and so and these are what we call formants. And these are, of course, are affected by the shape of the resonating chamber, which is your mouth. To kind of I'll point out some vowels here that are familiar to us that we won't be talking about when we talk about Latin. But for instance, right here in the dead smack in the middle of the chart is our friend, the upside down E, the schwa, which is, it's sort of, it makes sense that it's right in the middle because it's sort of just the kind of default when you just open your mouth and make a sound, it's just, right? It's kind of, it's not high, it's not low, it's not front, it's not back, it's just kind of there. So that's a great place just to point out that that's the schwa there. If you look at here again, we see vowels that appear in pairs. So again, on the bottom it says where the symbols appear in pairs. The one to the right represents a rounded vowel. So that means that the lips are curled into the kind of rounding that we know from, for example, the vowel oo, which is represented by this lowercase u. So your lips are obviously sort of pursed and curled around that vowel when we make that high, sort of close, high back vowel. So, but it is possible, and there are languages like Japanese that use an unrounded version of a vowel in that place. So it's the difference between oo and oo. That's just something to keep in mind. Now, similarly, in the front, the sort of front close vowel would be the difference between E and the French U vowel, which is represented in IPA by a Y, which is E. So you're making the same, your tongue is in the same position in your mouth for E and E. It's just that the lips curl around for that sort of French E sound. I have reduced this chart down to be a little bit more palatable for the purposes of looking at specifically at Latin. This is a language that we sing in probably the most as singers, and particularly those of us who are performing sacred music. And so it's really useful to kind of get a good understanding of the vowel sounds that are used in Latin. And there really aren't that many, and that's why I've eliminated all of the extraneous vowels that don't really occur. Some very clear ones to start are the same pair that we were just examining, the E versus oo vowel. So these are high vowels. They both, the tongue sits high in the mouth. So you can notice this for yourself. If you start with an E and you slide to an oo and feel where the position of how your tongue moves in your mouth as you slide from E to oo. E. So you see that the vowel feels as if it's moving sort of from the front of your mouth to the back of your mouth as you do that slide. Similarly, if you were to slide from, say, oo to ah, you feel your jaw drops slightly as well, but also the tongue will drop as well. So from oo, your tongue is in a very high position in the back of your mouth. As you slide down from oo to ah, it drops. Ooh, ah. And like I said, part of that is your jaw, and part of that There are a few that I've just marked that are sort of perilous for singing in Latin. So one is the vowel that on the page is written with the letter O. And we know, especially in English, we say this kind of diphthong version O. And if you are, singing in German or something like that, you do have a true pure O vowel. This vowel in IPA is really a quite closed sound. Like that German O. It's a pure and relatively close to the vowel U, as you can see. For Latin, what we want to err on the side of is what we call open O, which is that domine or deo. And this is something to always keep in mind when you're singing Latin, that it's not deo or domine, right? But it has that more open kind of O sound. Down around the bottom of the chart, we have two versions of the vowel that could be written as ah, like AH. And as you can see, one is more front and one is more back, although the separation between them, based on the arrangement of the chart, is not so wide as the difference between E and U. Those are very extreme vowels of front and back. The distinction between these two ah vowels is somewhat more subtle. And so the one in the front is a kind of Italian, a bright Italian ah that you would use in like the word piazza, or the word for freedom or free, libertà. Okay, it's a very bright ah sound, whereas the ah without the sort of hook on the top is the ah, the back ah, as in father. It sits in a very different place in your mouth. There's a difference between piazza and father. And so with Latin, since we really only have one, we're sort of shooting for something that is kind of in the middle. And this is also just sort of good right voice pedagogy. We're thinking of, we want that kind of chiaro scuro. So we want the brightness, that sort of resonant quality of the front vowel without being overly so, and then not to be too swallowed in the ah vowel. Notice that it's unrounded, which is why it's on the other side of that dot there. There is a rounded version of that back vowel. As you can see, it's this kind of upside down version of that. But that would be something that we're not used to performing. Okay, and then the last pair to kind of distinguish between are these the lowercase e and this epsilon type E, sort of a capital, a curvy capital E. The difference here, what the chart is labeling as a close mid vowel, A, again, is a very close, almost like that German O vowel that is very closed. This A is extremely closed. It's more, again, it's closer up to that E vowel than we normally think of in a kind of American accent of saying like A. That's actually somewhat more open than this vowel that you would find again in Italian or in Spanish. Most Romance languages have that kind of closed A sound. The epsilon down there below it is truly as in get, the vowel in the English word get, or bet, together. It's that sound. And so the reason that these symbols are useful is that we often, when we're writing out, transliteration of, even if it's just vocalese, vocal warm-ups, we'll spell that lowercase e perhaps like AY, A, or the epsilon we might spell lowercase EH, right? IPA makes this so much simpler because you just need one syllable to represent that sound, and there's no confusion once you know what those sounds make. The reason that I've put my sort of target circle between A and for Latin is this a similar problem to the ah distinction, which is that you kind of want something in the middle. There are it's not deo, right? And it's not deo. It's and so kind of that sort of bright, closed and open version of the vowel is a good target for.
Michael, sorry to
that.
interrupt. You actually cut out just a little bit during that last group of examples you were doing, the A,
Oh, okay.
A-O and such. Can you repeat those?
Yes, of course. So what I was saying is that you want to aim for a kind of middle ground between the very closed E sound and the open sound when we're dealing with Latin, since there really is just sort of one vowel sound when you see the letter E printed in Latin. I think this is a great time to pause and ask for questions before we apply this to a transcription of a familiar Latin text that we're all used to seeing quite often.
All righty. Yeah, we have a few comments coming in here. One was in response, in fact, to my earlier question about remembering which of the TH symbols is voiced and not. Someone has suggested that the theta symbol, the tall oval with the band through the middle, is like a waistband or somebody's waist, so they connect that with the word thin.
Okay.
That's so clever. I look forward to using that for the rest of my life.
There you go.
Let me double check two things here. Also, I'm curious about the larger number of vowels that are up there. Could you,
yes.
In a general sense, demonstrate one or two of the vowel sounds, or tell us about one or two of the vowel sounds that perhaps we've never sung before? See the kind of versatility of IPA. No pressure on that. Sorry.
Yeah, well, so what's interesting is that, and that's, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Once you understand the way that the chart works, I think you can actually, what's nice is that you can make these sounds for yourself. So for instance, when I'm looking at an IPA transcription of German, or even there are some French sounds that I need to refresh. I oftentimes will, it's easy for me to mix up the rounded form of A and So these sounds appear in German and in French, but if you take, again, I'm able to produce these sounds because I'm simply creating the vowel sound that I know and then rounding my lips around it. So A, right, is that lowercase e. If I round my lips around that vowel, I get this sort of O with the slash. Whereas if I have and then I round my lips around that, you get that sort of OE, which is often how it appears in like French, in the word heart in French, right? Again, like for instance, I did that Japanese sound, the idea of an unrounded ooh, which is sort of abstract, but you can do it if you think about, okay, if I'm making this ooh vowel, so that they're not round, ooh. You can do the same thing with oh. Okay, that's sort of symbol there. I should point out one other sound that's familiar to us in American English, which is the ash symbol down here, which is ah. Very forward and somewhat low, but that's ah there.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's always one that's fun that we encounter a lot when singing in English, right? How do you notate an ah? Because it's not an AY or an EH or an AH. It's just ah, and we have no corollary in English orthography.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, this is also this sort of horseshoe shape up here is another Greek letter that's escaping me, but it is or maybe upside down version of a Greek letter, but it is that's as in book or good. And that's another one that's hard to transliterate, I think, if you were having to write out how to pronounce that sound to maybe to a non-English speaker or something, but fits right there. So it's sort of between oo and o and slightly more forward. And so what I love about the chart is that it really is a map for a kind of the placement for these vowels.
That the Von Williams, we believe that's what Von Williams meant when he was writing humming tone,
Oh, right.
as opposed to and a humming tone. They're different sounds.
Yeah.
To him. Yeah, that's good. Good. I don't think I had any other questions here. So yeah, let's go and see what all this means in practice.
Okay.
Oh, we do have another question then, and this is a good one. Can you refresh with the Latin lowercase e sound?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's so, you know, if I was to say like, well, this will come up actually when we apply it, I think to the Ave Verum text. And I have transcribed that A sound as a lowercase e in my IPA transcription, but just I guess I'm sort of cautioning not to be too overly closed with the pronunciation in that case.
Yeah, and even the way you said it when speaking it in a kind of American Ave Verum as two different vowels. And
right. So we'll see that.
yeah. There was one also that you got into a little bit, but I'm wondering if you can expound upon what a formant is and what its role, what the tongue's role in shaping these things is.
Yes, I don't have. I wish I had pulled up I didn't know how in depth we were going to get here, but I might be able to pull something up actually really quickly to kind of show the differences. Yeah, this will work. Maybe. Okay. So here, what you're looking at are, and I'll sort of focus in on this image here, is what's called a spectrograph of the vowel, these vowel sounds up here. So this is E and oo and ah. And of course, our coming up from our fundamental frequency, there are whole number multiplications of that fundamental frequency going all the way up the spectrum, all the way up the frequency range, even past the point that we can hear them. But for each individual instrument, frankly, every instrument has a different set of frequencies above. So overtones above the fundamental that are louder and softer, depending on the construction of the instrument, the materials that are used, and in this case, the shape of the resonator. So as you move your tongue and your jaw and you change all of that, even subtly, it drastically alters the sound. And so these bands of activity, basically in the full spectrum, are known as the formants. So this image is pointing out, for instance, that the first formant for E is down somewhat close to the fundamental, but then the second formant is quite high, and that's what puts it all the way. It's the difference between, for instance, so E and oo have a very similar first formant, but the drastic difference between E and oo is this placement of the second formant, where the second formant for oo is very low, and the second formant for E is very high. But then you'll see that the first formant for ah is somewhat higher even than the formants for oo and E. So it's an interesting thing. And then again, that close second formant. That's because they're both back vowels. And then this was this is helpful as well. This to see that sort of trapezoid-like figure that the vowels are charted on for the IPA roughly equates to the frequencies of the first and second formant. And so it's not just a perfect square, in other words. And you can see that the frequency of formant 1 runs along the vertical axis here, and frequency of formant 2 runs along the horizontal axis.
Science!
Yes, it does get very, very scientific. if you want to go deep into it. You'll see images, for instance, of these are good pairs because, or a good set because you can have the same initial and closing consonant for all of these words, and they make real English words, and it enables you to record a speaker saying these words and then plot their vowels on a chart like this. As you can see, this is not as perfect and pristine as the sort of idyllic chart that we have for the IPA chart, and that's because all dialects of English are slightly different. And so when you're doing a narrow transcription of a dialect or something like that, you do have to kind of specify some of these things.
Yeah, generally as singers, we don't have to worry too much about singing in a Devonshire accent versus versus even a Cornish accent right next to it, or Alabaman versus Mississippian. In response to a couple of other questions we have here, can we return to the simplified Latin or the simplified vowel chart that you had? And can you clarify? So the circles, the red circles, are your additions.
Correct.
And of kind of of a standardized Latin.
Yes. In other words, for me, they're targets of where you're kind of wanting to place that vowel. Yeah. Ultimately, you kind of have to choose one when you're going with a transcription. You have to choose a symbol, but you're also welcome to tell your choirs that we're shading. I think if we sang every ah in Latin as ah as in father, you have a potential to kind of swallow the sound in a way that you don't particularly want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even that goes. Then there are regional issues. The Northern German is more likely to do one thing than an Austrian singing the same Latin text. And
yes, yeah, and I think this is true also in different regions of the United States. So certain dialects of American English have different sort of leanings with regard to the way that these vowels are pronounced. So you can say, you can use a reference word as the kind of ideal for some of these vowels, but the way that those words are pronounced in different parts of the country are not the same either. So it is useful to have a kind of standard that you sort of think of abstractly outside of your own personal pronunciation of certain words. And that's why I was saying, like, E, for instance, A and O are much more closed than the way that we would say A and O in our Pacific Northwest version of those vowels. So to understand that there's kind of the classical version of the vowel, I think is important to remember.
As a last question here before we go into the application of this, can you just once more demonstrate those extremes of the E's and the A's and the O's? I'm calling them that in finger quotes on purpose.
Yeah.
So just to help us before we move into the application.
Yes. So a closed E would be A, and the open E would be A. And then closed O would be O, and open O is O. I'll say also that some of this takes practice listening to. So, so for instance, the difference between ah and ah can be hard for people to hear initially. Because it's very subtle and it has to do with the placement of where the vowel is placed in the mouth. So it's okay if that's not something that's immediately apparent. And that's why I think having the visual and thinking about the anatomy is also helpful in sort of where you're placing the sound in your mouth. And you have kind of a visual diagram here.
I think that's also why a lot of conductors will direct more toward one than another, just so that there's some sort of unification. Even if it's not exactly, the precise 100% in the middle there. I think we've answered the questions in here, so let's proceed ahead and get our hands dirty in some text.
Okay, great. So for this workshop, I have decided to go with a very familiar Latin text that I think many of us will have sung. Certainly the Mozart arrangement, or perhaps the Bird. There are so many wonderful settings of this text, and it's a good one because it offers a variety of things that we're able to look at. So you can see in the first word that I've made some decisions about which symbols I'm using. So the first is that I'm using the A with the hook and my to signify a kind of brighter ah than would be than ah. The ah as in father, the kind of ah. This is we just want to have a brighter color. I think, as particularly with its Latin's closeness to Italian and other Spanish, other Romance languages, it is definitely better to err on the brighter side for those ah vowels. And then you'll see for the E, I've decided to go with the epsilon, with the caveat again that it's not it's not a kind of slack jaw version of that, but it really is an ave. We're not. I think that would be incorrect to sing. You know, verum is not. It's not right. It's definitely a verum. It's a more open sound, but again, I'm sort of targeting. It's not verum either. So I think finding that middle ground is good, but to imagine erring on the more open side. I will need to explain a few things that you're seeing as we go through. A few consonant sounds that most of them are very intuitive. However, there are some that I need to explain. One I want to point out is that the R here is not the R that's directly above it, with, you know, the serif on top there. This is this kind of curled R. That's a lateral flap. So a flap of the tongue. So it's that when we talk about having a flipped R, the R, the actual printed R that we're used to looking at, that symbol in IPA represents a rolled R, which is reserved for times when you really have more than one kind of turnover of the R. So rrr. If you have, and that you would find in Italian, if you have a like R following a consonant, like primavera, as opposed to an intervocalic. So even I just said primavera, that you have both there. You have the rolled R at the beginning and then the flap in the middle there, that intervocalic. So in other words, between two vowels. And that's often how we're encountering that R sound in Latin. And so here we have verum. It's just one flap of the tongue.
Can I interject here, Michael?
Of
We're
course.
having some folks that are reporting that their screen didn't shift onto the Ave Verum page. Do you mind closing the screen share and then sharing afresh?
Yeah.
Let's see if we'll see if that resolves it.
Okay.
And let's
how's that?
It all looks fine to me. I'd say let's move on and hope that that fixes the technological wonder that is modern webinar technology.
Yes.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. Yeah. Thanks very much.
Good. Some other things I want to point out, even just here on the first line as we get going. You'll see that there are these hash marks that I've included, and they happen to be at the beginning of the word, and in each case on the first line. But once we get to the second line, you'll see in the word Maria, the hash mark has been moved into the middle of the word. What these little hash marks are indicating are stress. And I've decided to do this because I think we talk about this as choral singers all the time. You know, where's the emphasis, where's the stress in the word? And we try to direct our musical phrasing to reflect the stress of the text. And so this is a more narrow transcription. You may not necessarily see these stress marks put into a transcription if you looked up a text, but I think it's useful, and so I included it here. There are some places where you actually see a lower hash mark and an upper hash mark, and in that case, the upper indicates primary stress, but many words have more than one stress place, and so the lower hash mark is representing that secondary stress. So the word immolatum, the primary stress is on latum, but there's a little bit of stress in that first syllable pair as well. Other other marks that I need to point out. So here, where you see this kind of almost like a fermata, a symbol, a ligature connecting two sounds. So that's bringing two what would otherwise be standalone consonants and sort of grouping them into one simultaneous gesture. So in this case, we're taking for virgine, we're taking the D plosive, the D stop, D, and the J fricative, and when you combine those, you get J as in judge. Okay, so virgine. The same is true down here for cruce. So we have a T and a sh, that big sort of curvy S, and you combine those two together and you get ch, cruce. I think, the lowercase j is a sound that I want to point out as the what we call a J glide. It's a palatal glide, so it's just what we would call a Y in American English. So y, cuyus. And I'm just scanning for anything. I think that kind of covers the unusual symbols. Okay, so I think perhaps at this time I will just read the text. I've included the sort of printed Latin, the English translation is always nice to have, and then my IPA transcription below. So I have Ave verum corpus natum de Maria Virgine vere passum immolatum in cruce pro homine. And I'll stop there just briefly to say this is one that we choral directors often have to remind those singers of Latin that this IN, it's so easy to pronounce that as in because that's the English word that it looks like. And to remember that this is really een. And again, if you're not used to associating that lowercase I with the sound E, even the IPA won't help you because the IPA transcription in this case is exactly the same as the printed word. So in cruce pro homine, cuius latus perforatum unda fluxit et sanguine. Here we have sanguine. I have decided to, there is a syllable for NG, and I debated, I went back and forth about sanguine and sanguine. Ultimately, I decided to keep the sound separate. So a literal N sound followed by a G sound, sanguine. But there's definitely some gray area there. Finally, esto nobis pregustatum in mortis examine. Here again, there was a debate about examine and examine. I think you could probably go either way. I think the X being between two vowels is a case for making it a voiced pair. So voicing both the consonant and the fricative. So examine as opposed to examine. But that's a very kind of narrow detail that you can decide, I think, for yourself as a choral director, which you'd like to do. But again, I think the value of knowing this language and being able to do your own transcription, if you have a particular preference for how you think you'd like to have the text pronounced, is that, of course, if your singers are also then fluent in this language, you can get right to the pronunciation that you want, and there's no kind of awkward searching around for the right transliteration to tell them to write into the score. Are there questions about this transcription that I've prepared for Ave Verum?
Oh, sorry, I have to get my mouse to the unmute button. Yeah. Nothing else has come up specifically on this. If I can make a couple of interesting observations here, like
Sure.
the kuyus, for example, which is near the top of the page.
Yes.
And it's worth folks noting that in IPA, the J is the Y sound, whereas we're used to that being a Y, which is an U sound. So what suggestions or what have you found that may be helpful to reprogram your mind for what you see versus what you produce?
Yeah, I think really thinking of it as a separate skill, and I also think looking at transcriptions of words that you know how to pronounce. So there are plenty of examples. For instance, if you looked at the IPA transcription of an English text, that would help to remember, help remind you that, oh yes, that this symbol means that sound. My sort of lame answer is that I had to do this for homework, and so I had lots of time to practice and get things wrong and have to correct myself. But it really is practice and familiarity, and the more you look at this, the more it comes to you, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. I love your suggestion there of transcribing an English text.
Yes.
It'd be interesting, if somebody, turn the nearest book to you, open it to page 20, and the first sentence, transcribe it into IPA. Now go.
Yes. Yeah.
In the language that you know, in English. Yeah. Good. And can you talk more about that J symbol, the glide, how that's created?
Yeah,
it's a consonant, but it kind of functions as a moving vowel in a way, or
yeah. So let's see. If I have changed my screen, and I'm hoping that others that this screen changed for others as well.
Let's say that it did, and I'll let you know if we get any commentary on it.
Okay. So the J, this J glide is actually it is a consonant. It's included in the consonant periodic table here, if you will, here, but it's what's called an approximant, and these symbols. The definition of an approximant is when you bring certain articulators close to one another, but they don't actually make contact. So in the case of, and I should say your tongue. So you bring your tongue close to a place in your mouth, but they don't make contact. So for instance, with the palatal approximant, that your palate, right, is we're all familiar with our palate, the soft palate anyway. And so bringing your tongue, the sort of mid part of your tongue, close to your palate but not quite. If you think about yeah, the way that your tongue gets very close to your palate but not quite, that's what makes that sound. Similarly, this upside down R over here is an alveolar approximant. That is the American R sound. So
we don't want to learn that one though, Michael.
We don't. For choral singing, we will almost never use it. However, it is another example of this approximant where you're putting your tongue close to that alveolar ridge, so the place where you would make a T or a D sound or N. The alveolar ridge, you can also see there's a symbol for every single place, or every single manner of articulation in this place. So it's a really common, that right behind the teeth. So you're bringing your tongue close to that alveolar ridge for an R, but you're not actually making any contact.
Cool. One of the things I love about the consonant chart and the vowel chart is the way that they kind of function similarly, in that they're showing a side cut of the mouth.
Yes.
And particularly along the top. Just as we kind of went from E to Oo, can you just, and we might be getting into the weeds here, can you tell very briefly about some of those words on the top and how they relate to the palate moving back?
absolutely. Yeah. So I already I explained bilabial and labiodental. So we start on the left hand side here with the furthest extremity, right, of the outer extremity of the vocal tract, which are your lips. So using the two lips for bilabial. Labiodental is the combination of teeth and lip, right? So those, and then dental, you'll see that really the only sound in the dental area are that TH sound. It's actually sometimes referred to as interdental because you, depending on the speaker, you actually literally put your tongue between the teeth when you make those sounds. The alveolar ridge is you can trace if you run your tongue along from behind your teeth, you can feel there's a little ridge right before the dome of the hard palate. So that's the alveolar ridge. Post-alveolar refers to just the space right behind that. So if you can imagine where sh and zh are made, it's not quite in the same place as s. If you put your tongue there for s and then slide back a little bit for sh. So you have to curl the tongue a little bit to get slightly behind the alveolar ridge. Retroflex, this is, we won't encounter this. It's used in Middle Eastern languages a lot. What it involves is a curling of the tongue. So you would make like it's the difference between ta, where you're using kind of the blade of your tongue, and da, where you curl your tongue back and use the tip of your tongue. But it sort of immediately conjures this like a Middle Eastern kind of sound. Da and da. Palatal sounds, again, we don't have in English. The only palatal sound that we have really is the J glide, the y sound. Other languages like German, for instance, like it's the difference between an ich laut and an ach laut. That's a good distinction there. Velar, so the velum, in this case, that really is the true soft palate. So where K and G, K and G are made, and also the velar nasal is NG. In contrast to that is the uvula. So that's really far back. We don't have any uvular sounds in English, but we do, there are, for instance, in French, you get the sort of R sound that is created by a fricative on the uvula, that kind of back of the throat uvular trill. Pharyngeal sounds, as you can see, are pretty rare. There are some pharyngeal fricatives, but you're not going to really encounter those. But the glottal sounds we do have in English, H, so that's just blowing air. Voiceless H, just blowing air through the open folds. But then also, of course, the glottal stop, where you make complete closure of the glottis and then sort of open it in a plosive manner. So yes, that is kind of the map of the vocal tract from the lips all the way around and down to the folds.
So cool. I just love this chart.
It's great.
And so this is, so they last revised in 2015. I'm trying to remember when it was before that. About how often does the group of linguists?
Yeah, I want to say there was a version. Well, there was a version when I was in, college, that was probably 2005 or 2008. Maybe we were using. So yeah, I mean, I would say maybe every 10 years. But again, it's more so. If they come together and they decide, oh, we discovered a new language and we need to add a symbol, you'll see that there are places that are grayed out. Those are judged to be impossible. It says shaded areas denote articulation is judged impossible. However, there are some empty boxes that are not gray, they're just empty. And I think part of that is we just maybe haven't discovered a language that uses that sound. It's not to say it's not possible, but they haven't created a symbol for that sound if we don't know of any language that uses it. So if we were to discover a new language that had, for instance, a palatal tap, then we would have to come up with a symbol for that.
I wish there was some like 10-year-olds who came across this and said, okay, I accept that challenge. I'll invent a language that only uses the things that, but I digress. Thank you very much, Michael. We're at time. This is magnificent. I thank you also for your kind of simplification of the vowel chart, just to isolate the Latins, and for the fact that you, in doing so, said that you were making the chart more palatable. That
was really not intended, but
Very low to good fun.
That's why it was so wonderful. Thank you to also for all of our participants for your questions and contributions. You can help to create more sessions of the Emerald Choral Academy by donating at emeraldensemble.org. The next session will take place on Thursday, October 29th at 1:00 p.m. in the afternoon, Pacific time. And this will be taught by our very own Scott Kovacs, who's right here to where I am. And he will provide the Singer's Guide to the Aging Voice. Registration is already available at emeraldensemble.org. I hope you can join us. And in the meantime, I'm Gary Cannon, and on behalf of all of the Emerald Ensemble, I wish you good physical, mental, and musical health. Thanks for being here.